Hi, everyone. Thanks for being with us for Making the Grade. I'm Michelle Edmonds from Idaho News 6. So nice to see all of you live on Facebook or on any of the Idaho News 6 social media platforms, where we're going to be talking about education yet again this morning and what's happening in our great state. Of course, we always love to have your comments and your questions, your thoughts as we are live here, or afterwards we go back and review and look at those. Joining me to talk about what he has been covering and the staff at Idaho Education News is Kevin Richert. Hello, Kevin. Are you hot, buddy?
Oh, yeah, just fine. You're just venting out here. Okay, great.
All right, well, let's get to some hot topics then. Spring reading scores. This was such a big deal, and we knew it would be because of the pandemic. So the Idaho Reading Indicator is given to young kids, kindergarten through third graders, to try and figure out how well they're reading. And this isn't a matter of, do they know their ABCs? This is a matter of, are they able to learn to read in order to move on in school? And we now have some indication that, not surprising, the pandemic had an effect on the scores.
Right. So let's kind of look at some of these numbers and get kind of a general sense of what we see in the numbers, as opposed to maybe what we were expecting or maybe not expecting. Yeah, I don't think there are huge surprises here, Michelle, because what we found with the numbers that came out, is we saw some improvement, which you're supposed to see. And you saw, about 65% of K through 3 students were at grade level on the spring IRI. That's a little bit lower than we've seen in past years. Past year, those spring scores, back before the pandemic, we were close to 70% students reading at grade level. So a fairly significant drop off there, but nothing that you would be surprised by, given what these students have gone through in the 2020-21 school year and going back the year before for the first through third grade students. They've been through a lot of upheaval. So the scores being lower, not terribly surprising. The level of improvement that we saw from fall to spring, you see that every year. You don't want to take it for granted, but that's how it's supposed to work. Your scores are supposed to improve over the course of the year as teachers work with students and figure out what students need, where the gaps are for individual students. You expect to see improvement. You didn't see as much improvement this school year as you have seen in the past. That, again, not really surprising when you think of all the upheaval that students have been through just this school year. Some students in a hybrid model, some students in an online model, some students moving back and forth from one mode to another as the pandemic has dictated school opening decisions. So really nothing terribly unexpected here in the numbers. They're lower. The student improvement is lower than we've seen pre-pandemic. But again, I don't see how you could be surprised by any of those results.
Again, when we're talking about the Idaho Reading Indicator, we're talking about the state's youngest students here too, kindergarten through third graders.
And remember what this test is for. This is really a test that's designed to help teachers figure out, okay, which students do I have that have deficiencies, that have needs, specific needs that I need to address as a teacher. It's really a diagnostic test, and that's why it's given in the fall and given again in the spring, so that teachers get a sense of how these students have fared over the course of the school year. So, this is not like the SAT. It's not a high stakes test. It's not an achievement test in that sense. It's really a diagnostic test. It's a screener for teachers, but it also gives you a really good sense of how students have been faring over the course of the pandemic.
Were there any demographic groups, Kevin, that fared worse than others?
Yes. So Sammy Edge had our story on Monday. These numbers came out late Monday afternoon, and she did a really nice job of looking at what happened with some of these demographic groups. Again, the baseline here, this table, that third column is showing you the improvement from fall to spring, by percentage points. So you can see for all students, we're talking about 15.5 percentage points worth of increase. Where you see the green arrows on that right-hand column, those are the demographic groups that showed improvement, that showed greater than 15.5 percentage points of improvement. So you can go through, you can see, Native American students showed improvement over and above what we saw in the general population. Latino students showed some improvement that way. Students, economically disadvantaged students showed improvement over and above what you would expect. So in some demographic groups, yes, you did see greater level of improvement than you saw in the overall population. So that's an encouraging finding.
Where does this conversation go when it comes to funding early literacy, which you and I have talked about over and over again and will continue to do so? It's one of the governor's top priorities, and now with such a massive state surplus, it is yet rising to the top of the discussions again about how to put more money into the lower grades to make sure kids are reading on grade level by third grade. That's where they need to be in order to continue on and be successful in school. So Kevin, when we have these reading indicators, and now finally, I think, the state is starting to get this data that it has needed since the pandemic happened, what happens to the conversation about funding early literacy?
Well, that's a really good question. And I think these scores are going to flavor the debate on a lot of spending decisions. You talked about early education, and we don't need to recap what happened during the legislative session with that federal early education grant. That's been pretty well documented. But also the question of all-day kindergarten. Do you fund all-day kindergarten at the state level? That's going to be a hot topic at the 2022 legislative session. I think you're also going to have questions. We're going to have questions. We're going to want to get a better sense of the state has put considerable money into summer reading programs, summer catch-up programs for students. This was part of where Governor Little wanted to put money, some of the COVID relief money, knowing that there are going to be some challenges, knowing that we're going to have learning gaps. Well, now we have a better sense of where some of these learning gaps are in terms of early reading. So now the question is, well, how are these summer programs working, and what kind of results are we seeing off of those summer reading programs? That's something we're going to want to look at closely. But you're right. The debate about pre-K, the debate also about all-day kindergarten, those topics aren't going away anytime soon. And if anything, I think we'll see even more discussion about them in 2022. And I think proponents of pre-K or all-day kindergarten can point to these numbers and say, look, we have seen some drop-off in reading skills because of the pandemic. Not surprising, not unexpected, but still something that I think you're going to have proponents really pushing to address and put some funding into programs designed to reverse those trends.
I think we have to give a shout out to teachers out there too, because dealing with a pandemic and then being a kindergarten, first, second, third grade teacher when you're trying to desperately reach your students. And as you said, so many were on hybrid models, at least for some of the year, and wearing masks and everything that they had to deal with, just teaching phonics with a mask on. I realize what these educators went through in these younger grades, and to see, honestly, so little drop off compared to what was feared, we have to give our hats off to educators.
When you think about how teachers really had to rethink how they teach reading and, rethink the delivery model and rethink how you connect to students. Yes, it's been a big transition for teachers. And, I'm sure teachers are just hoping, fingers crossed, that it's going to be a lot more like normal come this fall.
Aren't we all, Kevin? Aren't we all?
Yeah.
Okay, let's jump to another hot topic, since it might be 104 some places today. This has been a hot topic for quite a while, but the State Board of Education has released what it is calling its Campus Diversity and Inclusion Policy. This is looking at what the State Board of Education controls with its 4 public university and colleges here in the state of Idaho. And of course, this debate goes back to the legislative debate about critical race theory and what's being taught in our public universities and colleges. And now the State Board of Education has come out with a unanimous vote on what their policy is going to be. Kevin, talk to me about this and what it said.
Okay. Well, let's first before we get into the meat of the policy, let's set the stage for where we are right now. So what the state board did, and again, this was late Monday afternoon. We had a lot of news break on us late Monday afternoon. The state board met. They approved this policy on the first reading, and state board reviews these policies over multiple readings, 2 readings basically. So what the state board did was basically it served notice that this is a policy that will come back in August. The board will take public comments between now and August, and I believe they meet the latter part of August in Pocatello. That is where the vote will take place. And really what this policy is designed to do, and here's really the sentence that kind of is the crux of this policy. It says, each institution shall strive to create environments in which diversity and inclusion are valued, promoted, and embraced in alignment with the goal of achieving educational equity. That language, if it's approved by the state board in August, that would apply to Idaho's four-year colleges and universities. So we're talking about Boise State, U of I, Idaho State, and Lewis Clark State College. So, what it does is the state board is, again, staking out a position on diversity and inclusion, staking out a position on topics that have been very divisive within the Idaho Republican Party. I mean, you still have, we'll talk about it here in a couple of minutes. We still have Lieutenant Governor Janice McGeehan chairing a task force looking at indoctrination issues. But you have the state board made up largely of Governor Brad Little's appointees saying, well, we don't see the issues of indoctrination. I mean, they're saying, the allegations of systematic indoctrination, that there's no basis for that, but there's no foundation for that. So you've got the state board as an offshoot of Governor Little staking out a very different position on some of these topics than we're seeing from the lieutenant governor and from some of the more conservative lawmakers.
So what do you expect to see and hear before August, Kevin? Does this become a political battle? I mean, it already has been, but does it become even more heated, per se, before they meet in August?
Well, we'll watch and see what the comments are, and we'll see what kind of public comments the state board gets. That's something we'll want to watch very closely. We saw a little bit of the politics come into play even, Monday afternoon. Debbie Critchfield, who is still on the State Board of Education, she is planning to step down fairly soon to focus on running for state superintendent. Well, Critchfield, like the rest of the state board, voted to approve this policy, at least on the first reading. Brandon Durst, who is also running in the Republican primary for state superintendent, blasted the state board and called out Critchfield personally, saying that, this is, she's not paying attention to the concerns of many Republicans, and she's not showing a real concern about student indoctrination. So, the battle is on, and we're going to see probably more of those kind of comments and more of that kind of back and forth leading into that vote in August.
And as you said, meanwhile, the task force, the Education Indoctrination Task Force, spearheaded by the Lieutenant Governor Janice McGeehan, met again last week, and that was covered pretty well between Idaho News 6 and Idaho Education News. So if you want to read all of what happened there, you can go to either one of our websites. In fact, Kevin, Idaho Education News did a great blog as it was going on. Just real quickly, we don't need to get deep into the weeds on this, but what became the outcome? Because this indoctrination task force isn't over. So what was the outcome from this session?
Well, there really wasn't an outcome, and we didn't really expect an outcome. We expected more of a discussion on indoctrination concerns at the K-12 level. We'll see more of that in July. The task force is going to meet, I believe it's July 22nd, to focus on higher education. I sat through the 4 hours of the meeting on Thursday. There weren't a lot of really strong takeaways. It really was kind of a strange meeting to cover. Really kind of it seemed like, some of the public comments were kind of all over the place. There was, a bizarre beginning to the meeting where the meeting was put on hold because of some audio problems, Priscilla Giddings, the co-chair of the task force, state representative, who's also running for lieutenant governor, hoping to replace Janice McGeehan as lieutenant governor, accused public television of deliberately sabotaging the audio to sabotage the meeting. Well, public TV has come back and said that that's groundless, that they have no control over the audio within the rooms. Within State House committee rooms, they have this really kind of bizarre back and forth between the co-chair of the committee, the co-chair of the task force, and public television, with this really kind of unfounded allegation of doctoring, of sabotage. You see this photo that we just scrolled to, students, in attendance wearing T-shirts that read "Hands off of our schools." They were asked by an audience member to move out of the line of sight so that they wouldn't be on public television's video stream. Lieutenant Governor Janice McGeehan asked the students to move. The students didn't move, and McGeehan eventually just kind of dropped the matter, and the students stayed where they were for most of the hearing. But as I said, 4-hour meeting. By the end of the meeting, as our reporter Blake Jones pointed out, the crowd had kind of thinned out. Both critics and supporters had kind of left for the day. So it was a strange meeting. I think we'll see what happens in July, and we'll be there. We'll cover it in full, and we'll try to do as much fact checking on the spot as possible as we tried to do last week.
So once again, Kevin, I just want to get at the heart of the matter, which is that this task force is trying to figure out if indoctrination, however you want to define that term per se, is going on inside Idaho schools. And what I'm hearing from you, at this point, there has been no proof of that. And that's what the State Board of Education is saying as well, correct?
Right. So in the middle of this meeting on Thursday, you had the president of the state board, Kurt Liebig, put out a statement saying, we didn't attend Thursday's meeting. We turned down an invitation to speak at Thursday's meeting because he said that one of his, he was concerned about kind of the tone of the first meeting. And as a result, the state board ultimately decided to submit written testimony rather than showing up in person. But again, in the middle of this meeting, you had the president of the state board issue a statement saying, we have not seen evidence of indoctrination. And that you got a task force right now that is running counter to and operating counter to most of the education groups in the state. State Board of Education, State Department of Education has had very little involvement. State Superintendent Shuri Ibarra had been invited to speak. I believe she's on vacation, but she has not, spoken to this task force yet, and the State Department has had very little involvement. The Idaho School Boards Association had a representative. That representative stepped down. The School Boards Association decided that they didn't really want to have involvement in this task force because they were concerned about the tone, the direction, the makeup of the task force. So you have this group that's really handpicked by the lieutenant governor, very one-sided in terms of ideology and belief on indoctrination in schools, proceeding along, having these, more informational meetings than anything. And we'll have another one in July. We may get some recommendations from this group. That's their plan, is to come out with recommendations in August. We don't know what those recommendations are going to look like. We don't even know where they're going to go. There's no real clear direction for how this task force is going to unfold. There's no real clear direction for how any of these recommendations would come to pass. So it's unusual. I've not quite seen a process like this.
Okay, let's leave that where it is. We'll come back to that in July and in August, of course. I want to skip to, if any parents are out there and you've tuned out, you need to listen in. And hey, high school students, this could be something you really want to hear. And that's that the SAT could be going away in Idaho. Not quite yet, but college entrance exams, of course, a real big deal in Idaho in the last couple of years, Kevin. First and foremost, because right now in the state of Idaho, every high school student must take a college entrance exam as a graduation requirement. You have to take one in order to get out of high school, even if you don't plan to go to college. And two, the state sponsors an SAT day where the state picks up the tab to make sure that all students will take this college entrance exam, the SAT. But now there has been plenty of backlash from what has happened nationally with college entrance exams. And it seems like Idaho may be following suit.
Yeah. So in the middle of this national movement that we've seen across college campuses, with college administrators, university administrators really questioning the value of college entrance exams, including the SAT, more and more colleges are getting away from requiring the SAT. And that's what the state board did earlier this month. The state board got rid of a requirement that mandated that the state's colleges and universities look at SAT scores or college entrance exam scores. We keep saying SAT, but there are multiple versions of college entrance exams. The state board said, we're not going to require the colleges and universities to use college entrance exams as a criteria for admission. They could still decide to do that. The colleges and universities could still make that decision on their own and opt to require or look at college entrance exam scores. It's really unclear what's going to happen. That's going to unfold really over the next couple of semesters. I think all four of the four-year schools are kind of looking at the issue right now and trying to figure out where they're going to go. But for the time being, at least for this class coming in, the waiver of this college entrance exam requirement, which goes back to the pandemic, that is still in place. What the state board did was essentially they extended that. They turned it into more of a long-term policy than a short-term waiver. That's what's happening at the college and university level. So for the near future, Idaho students planning to apply to these state institutions may not need to take the college entrance exam in order to, fill out their application, in order to check off all the boxes needed to apply. But you are right. For the time being, at least, there is a requirement that all high school graduates take a college entrance exam. And that's why you've had this SAT day in place to allow students to take the SAT during the school day for free. The costs are covered by the state. I wonder what's going to happen there. And the state board is going to take a look at that policy, that administrative rule that requires high school students to take a college entrance exam in order to graduate. Look for that to come up at the state board meeting, also perhaps in August. And that's a process that if the state board decides, maybe it's time to get away from that requirement, the legislature would weigh in January. So a lot of moving parts here, but the short version of it, there's really a sea change, and you're seeing it in Idaho as well, where once the college entrance exam was a big deal, it was a requirement. I remember when I was in high school, I took it multiple times. It was a big part of the portfolio as I was applying to colleges. Not so much right now, because for years there have been concerns that the SAT and all other college entrance exams, is there a bias? Does it break in favor of students of wealth? Does it disadvantage students from low-income households? Does it have a racial bias, an ethnic bias? And is it really a fair and accurate indicator of whether a student is going to succeed in college? There's a lot of research that questions the overall value of these college entrance exams, and I think that's why you're seeing colleges in other states moving away from it. I think that's part of why the state board moved away from it as a statewide requirement for the state's colleges and universities.
But Kevin, on the flip side there, the reason Idaho put this into place, or at least one of the major reasons, was to try and meet the state's number one goal, which is to get more students to go on after high school. So has this not helped that situation? Is there any data to prove that the SAT day has helped or not done anything to improve that statistic?
I don't think you've got any research that I know of anyway that draws that fine a distinction. But what we do know is we've been doing the SAT day for almost a decade now. And this costs about $1 million a year in taxpayer money. So it's not a small chunk of money we're talking about here. it's one of several things that the state has tried to do to improve college go-on rates, to encourage more high school graduates to continue their education. And in totality, we really are not seeing much of a change in terms of student go-on rates. In fact, the go-on rates dropped significantly during the pandemic. So there's nothing out there that would lead you to believe that SAT day, as one ingredient in this formula the state has tried to use here, there's no clear evidence that SAT day is encouraging students to rethink their decisions about going to college, and that was part of the goal. And so right now, it's hard to say that it's had that kind of an impact. It's maybe helped some students take the SAT when they might not have been able to afford it otherwise, or maybe they've been able to take it multiple times. Sometimes students take the SAT in their junior year, and then they take it again early in their senior year when they've had a chance to take it once, get a feel for it, come back, maybe improve their score. Lots of students do that, and maybe that's helped. But is it driving students to college? Hard to say that that's actually been happening.
Fascinating. What one thing was a decade ago may not be another thing a decade later. It's really...
It was really all in on the idea of the SAT as a vehicle to try to get kids to go on to college. And, the tide is changing on college entrance exams, not just in Idaho.
Well, that leaves us to a good point, because in case you did not see Kevin's series last week, talking about university students and what happened to them during the pandemic, and who decided to go on campus and who did online learning, and how the universities dealt with fewer students coming to school and where students are going next year, I highly encourage you to go to idahoednews.org and read Kevin's entire series. It was some brilliant work, Kevin. And in case people didn't see it or got lost in the midst of things last week, you publish numerous stories a day on this. And it was, as we're wrapping up Making the Grade, if you could just put a bow on that series for us, what is the next thing that you want to know come this fall about college students, or for that matter, high school students who are trying to decide whether to go to college, or college students who are deciding whether or not to go back to college or not? What do you want to know next?
Well, I want to know two things. I want to know what the numbers look like. We did see drop-offs in enrollment. We've seen drop-offs in enrollment since the pandemic. I want to know what we see in terms of the enrollment numbers in the fall of 2021. Now, are we in a different place? Are students in a different place? Are those numbers rebounding because it's important not just for the students? First and foremost, it's important for young adults, but it's really important for the institutions as well, because so much of their budget is tied to enrollment and getting students on campus. But the other thing I really want to find out about, and I really look forward to talking to some of the students I had a chance to talk to this spring, is, okay, you're back on campus in the fall. Is it different? Is it a more normal, fulfilling, enriching experience to be on campus as opposed to what it was like this past school year? Because all the students I talked to were missing different things, and a lot of them were missing a lot of the same things. They were missing being in a real classroom alongside their classmates, alongside their friends. They missed social opportunities. They missed clubs and activities, and the everyday experiences that make college. Is it different for students this fall? Is the experience different? Those are the things I'm going to want to find out about, because, as you say, we did a series on this last week, 5 stories. We'll come back and do another batch of stories in the fall when we have a better sense of what happened on the other side of this summer, and maybe on the other side of some of the pandemic numbers that we'd seen.
I'm looking forward to it. I felt like I really got to know the students in your stories. I connected.
I got to know them, talking to them. It was a lot of fun. They're sharp, they're driven, they're focused, and they are dealing with things as young adults that I never had to think about things like this when I was going to college. And, thank goodness, because they've really had to make some tough life decisions. And, They've shown a lot of spirit. You used the word grit when we talked about it last week. I mean, that's a perfect description. These students they're focused. They're not feeling sorry for themselves. They're just, we're making the best of a tough situation.
I am glad they are our future, as we like to say.
Yeah, we're in good hands with young adults with that kind of drive and spirit.
Most definitely. Well, Kevin, thank you to you and the gang over at Idaho Education News, who consistently do just the fantastic job of following education news throughout the entire state of Idaho. We appreciate your expert and insight every week here on Making the Grade. And I think in the next couple of weeks, we are actually finally going to see each other in person, which is really exciting as well. I know. So thank you, everybody, for being here for Making the Grade. If you want to read about any of these stories in depth, you'll find them linked on the idahonews6.com website or at, of course, idahoednews.org. Kevin, try and stay cool, my friend. Lots of lemonade, swimming pools.
You as well. Hydrate. Use the air conditioner.
Remember how we used to say
as much as possible.
Remember how we used to say wash your hands, put on your mask? This week, it's nice to be able to say, stay cool.
Yes, exactly. Have a good 4th, all.
Happy 4th, everybody. Thanks for being here for Making the Grade.